Welcome to the Anywhere office.
Hey, this is Phil Montero from the anywhereoffice.com, and I am delighted and pleased to have back on the blog here via video from maybe one of your last times from New Jersey there, Phil Simon, noted technology expert, author of 3 books going on 4. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about is his new book, The Age of the Platform. Last time Phil was on, we were talking about The New Small, a book I truly love and hold near and dear to my heart. He's a technology expert, small business technology expert. He helps businesses optimize the use of their tech. He's a speaker, a writer, and my doppelganger. Welcome, Phil.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm like a fungus. You can't get rid of me.
You're a fun guy. That's what I'd like to say.
There you go.
And yes, the reason Phil's, just a side note here, the reason Phil's got empty bookshelves and boxes behind him is he's making the big journey, the big move from Jersey. You're going from Jersey to Las Vegas, baby.
The books were just there for show. I'm actually a functional illiterate.
Nice. So making the move. And so, you know, what I really want to talk about, there's a couple of things I want to touch on today, Phil, and I thank you for taking the time today. But you have, I loved The New Small, and you've written, this is your 4th book now, The Age of the Platform. And I think I think the topic of the book is very timely, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about the topic. And then I want to get into a little bit about the way that you're publishing this book, because I think that's unique, and I think the folks here on the Anywhere office will really find that interesting, because I'm sure a lot of them are probably authors or want-to-be authors and have books inside them that they'd like to publish, and I think your journey and the story of how you're doing this is very interesting. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the age of the platform?
Sure. There are 4 companies right now, Phil, as you know, that are just, quite frankly, killing it. Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. And as a self-employed small business person, sometimes I say to myself, if a client doesn't want to pay me, or I get crushed on taxes, or say to myself, why do I do what I do? Sometimes I'll kind of toy with the notion of going to work for a big company. Mm-hmm. So which one would it be? And it's hands down Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. So I started thinking about those companies, and having been around in technology for the last, now 15 years. Facebook obviously is a much newer company, but the other 3 companies have been around for a long time. What is it about those companies that have led to such amazing levels of sustained success? They didn't reach the top of the mountain and start to fall. They're continuing to do different things. You know, Apple started off really as a computer company, and now it's arguably a content company, right? It makes other things than computers. Amazon, when Bezos founded the company in 1994, he was thinking about an online bookstore, not about streaming videos in the cloud or selling excess compute power or being a publishing company, and did all of the other 2 companies. So these companies have really morphed in unexpected ways, and I'm unaware of a book that looks at those 4 companies and says, what can we learn from them? What can I, as a small business owner of one, learn from Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google? What are these other emerging platforms out there like Foursquare, Twitter, or LinkedIn? So thought that I had a good idea for a book, and decided to give it another go.
Yeah, and I love that you picked those 4 and kind of how you came upon it, like you said, because who would you work for and why? And I think what's really interesting is that you were saying how, as a small business person or maybe a solopreneur, what can you learn? And a lot of people would think, well, I don't have the resources of a Google or an Apple, so there's not much I can do. Of course, you know, they're successful, they've got all this behind them, but it's not really about. I mean, you know, it's not that it's not about the resources. That's part of it. But I think your angle at the book, you're really looking more at how they've used things like community and building kind of a passion and being flexible in what they do and how they respond to emerging markets and a changing environment that anyone. In fact, in some cases, you might argue that a small business would be more inclined to be able to do some of those things than a larger company.
Absolutely, Phil. There really is a lot that we can learn from these companies. It is just a matter of scale. No, I don't have $5 billion to go out and spend on a major acquisition.
Hold on. Here, let me help you out here, buddy.
But that doesn't mean I may not have 50,000. It doesn't mean that I can't engage in a strategic partnership. It doesn't mean that I can't try something out and fail. You know, getting on to failure for a second, Google fails all the time. right? And Google,
Yes, they do.
Google Plus is an amazing success, right?
Yeah.
I read the other day that they have 10 million users in 2 weeks. It's added $10 billion to its brand.
Wow.
But think about the debacle that Buzz was. Google Wave didn't catch on.
Wave, no, yeah, all the hype, but
right. Orkut is basically dead except in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
So the Google had 3 other bites at the apple and finally seems to have got it right with Google Plus. So you could argue that there is this big difference, but these companies aren't successful because they're big. They're big because they're successful, if that makes any sense.
That's it makes a lot of sense. And I mean, even in the new small, that's part of what you talk about is that companies are willing to take a chance or take a risk and try something different and not be married to it. If it doesn't work, then they can shift and be flexible. And, I mean, certainly when I talk about the Anywhere office and what I talk about is a shifting workplace and a shifting model. And, you see it, and I know you talk about it, and we're going to, again, in a few minutes, we're going to talk about how you're actually approaching publishing this book, but you see markets like music, and I know you've talked about sometimes about Napster and how that shook up the music world and iTunes and selling tracks for 99 cents, and the movie world right now is being shaken up by Netflix and what they're doing, and video stores closing and streaming video, and Amazon, as you mentioned, getting into streaming video. And a lot of these old school dinosaur industries have trouble with these shifting markets, and publishing, again, as we're going to talk soon, is another one. And you see the middleman get removed a lot of times, and it allows the creative people to more directly communicate through a platform, I think. And that's what I'd like you to explain a little bit is, what do you mean by platform? Can you define that a little bit more on what you're talking about?
Absolutely. To me, a platform, Phil, and it's a term that does get used quite a bit. We were talking about it as sort of attaining buzzword status before. But to me, a platform really is this vibrant ecosystem. You're embracing third parties, partners, consumers, users, and by users I mean basically people who don't pay out of pocket. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at other companies not as competition the way that Carnegie or Rockefeller did, or even arguably Bill Gates back in the late 90s with Netscape. Right? The Microsoft model was basically binary. We'll either buy you or we'll crush you.
The
right?
Borg, as I like to
Right,
become part of the collective, or
I mean, don't get me wrong. Jeff Bezos and Larry and Sergey and Mark Zuckerberg aren't running benevolent for profits. They're trying to make money, but people really like, for the most part, these companies. Mm-hmm. Right? A lot of people used to hate Microsoft. They used to hate Carnegie Steel. They used to hate Ma Bell and AT&T and IBM. Well, people love, present company included, Macs. People are very passionate about Facebook and Google. Not everybody. Not everyone really.
I'm on the fence on Facebook.
That opinion
pisses me off a lot, so I can't always say.
But these companies
I know what you're saying, that people are passionate about it and about being part of that, being known as someone who is part of that community and part of that environment and that.
Sure. And these companies embrace not just paid customers. They realize that more people who are spending time on their platform benefit the platform altogether. So Amazon's a great example. I can review books on Amazon even though I didn't buy it on Amazon, because that rating, that tag, that keyword makes Amazon's rating and recommendation engine a lot more valuable, a lot more accurate, which lets them sell more stuff. So it's not simply about creating a walled garden and working with a finite number of people. You want to work with, there are 400,000 apps in the App Store. Mm-hmm. Right? Amazon, Apple has sold something like 10 billion apps.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And a lot of them are free. So you leave your APIs open to let people develop them. Now, you don't want people developing pornography APIs, right? You don't want things to be jailbroken. So there's always that tension, and the book describes that the platform is not a silver bullet. There are challenges, that there are perils of platforms. Arguably, MySpace was on its way to being a big platform. AOL, you could argue, with 100 million users, right? These are companies that don't really get talked about very much. So I do think there are lessons to be learned from these companies, and other companies, Phil, are trying to be planks in these platforms. So Foursquare, for example, is it a platform? Is it a plank in a platform? Yeah. I don't even know, but there are extensions out there, so you can check in through your Android, right, through Foursquare. So these things are working together, and it's really a vibrant ecosystem. It's much less about sort of a traditional business model.
Yeah, well, it's like you talked about. And I think there's been a shift in general in business toward the idea of of competition and collaboration. And it's something I try to view people not as competitors. If there's somebody else in the same niche or the same space as I am, I try to look for ways that we can collaborate because we probably each bring something different to the table.
And if they look alike like we do, all the better.
Then even better, because then we can fool them, or I can go into a Chinese restaurant with your book and maybe get some free wonton soup because they think I'm you. So,
there you go.
But one of the things that I think is interesting is that you talk about it being an ecosystem which changes, and something like Foursquare, which was huge when it first came out, but now you kind of see Facebook takes elements of that and starts to implement, as you said, it doesn't have to be something internal you thought of. They saw this location check-in, which was popular, and who knows if Foursquare will continue to survive on its own. Twitter now has its own photo sharing service, whereas everyone, all the YFrog and the TwitPic and all of these services sprung up around this platform
right.
that was Twitter and that social networking platform. And then sometimes they will integrate some of those into their own. Sometimes, as you mentioned, they may buy or partner with other companies. So it really is a shifting landscape. And I would have to assume that one of the big lessons is being flexible in your approach and being able to step back and kind of take an open look at what the landscape or how the business is changing as the technology and the platform changes.
And these things constantly change. There's an engineering principle, dynamic stability, and I love that term, how something can at once be stable and dynamic. Mm-hmm. And these four platforms really are. They're morphing in different ways, but fundamentally they're kind of staying the same. It's an interesting paradox. But you're right, it isn't necessarily, Phil, about being the first out. The iPad wasn't the first MP3 player. Friendster and MySpace preceded Facebook. Yeah. But if you look at those companies and the lessons, they weren't afraid to do things in different ways, and as a result they occupy, yes, they have problems, but don't tell me for a second that Microsoft wouldn't kill to have Google's problems.
Yeah.
I mean, who wouldn't want to have these kinds of problems? Because, and you saw Apple yesterday made more money than the history of the company. The stock was over $400. I read that the stock may actually be over $600 by the end of next year. So these companies, as I said before, yes, they make cool products, but they get this whole notion that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. You can find people out there who can take your product and make an app or create through an API an interesting service that actually benefits everybody. Yep. So there's this notion of mutual gain. It's not, to your point, well, if this company makes money, then I can't. Mm-hmm. Again, these Apple and Amazon and Facebook and Google to some extent all compete with each other, so it's not like kids in a sandbox. Sometimes it is, but then, of course, they'll start throwing sand at each other, knocking down each other's sandcastles.
It's probably a lot like kids in a sandbox, actually, after I've watched my kid in a sandbox.
Yeah, so it's. I just think it's really interesting, and I'm unaware of a book out there like it. So I actually, through Kickstarter, am taking steps to get the book out 6 months ahead of what a traditional publisher told me I could do.
And that's what I want to talk about here, because I got to tell you, I have to read this book, and I want to do everything in my power to make sure that it sees its publishing light. So let's talk about that. You were going to, I know we talked to, we've been talking a while, since you started having this idea and you were working on it, and you were going to go the traditional publishing route, but instead, you've now gone kind of with the way that you did your last book, which is different, and I'd like to talk about that, how you're funding this book and how you started your publishing company and what that means. And because, again, I think there's a lot of people who might think, oh, I'd love to have a book, but wouldn't even dream of approaching a publisher, and you've actually got some connections, but you still chose to do it this way. And I also wanted to let people know, if they find this book interesting, how they can get behind it so they can help it. We can all help to bring it to the light of day, because I love this idea of it's a term you hear kicked around, but I don't think a lot of people know what it is, which is crowdsourcing and what that means and how that played a part in this book.
Yeah, there are elements, Phil, of crowdsourcing, I think, in a lot of successful projects, and mine is just one of probably 1,000 Kickstarter projects going at any point. Some are books, some are films, some are music-oriented, some are art-oriented. But even yesterday, when I put 3 mock-ups of potential covers on the site, I was soliciting feedback. Now, clearly, I don't want everyone to agree with everyone that I'm writing. In fact, I firmly expect that. I disagreed today with a guy on an interview. Won't get into it, but to me, the best books are the ones that make you think. I don't want to write an anodyne Me Too book. Mm-hmm. Doesn't really teach you anything. I'd rather people loved it and people hated it, rather than people said, eh. Yeah. So because this topic technology and platforms to me is so current and changes so frequently. I didn't want to put this book out in March, so through Kickstarter, I'm trying to raise the funds to pay the people, so it, just like the new Small, looks every bit as professional as a book from a Random House or an O'Reilly. And I'm about halfway towards the goal as of this taping, so hopefully I'll get to the rest of it within the next, I think it's 35 days.
Okay, yeah, I think it is about 30. So let's just take a step back there and talk about this. So you were going to go the traditional publishing route, but they weren't going to be able to, or their estimates on when they could publish this book was like sometime in early to mid 2012 next year. And as you mentioned, this is this is a hot topic, or a topic that changes so dynamically. So you really wanted to get the book out sooner than what they were telling you they could do. And that's their estimate now, not to mention delays that could happen and everything else that comes along with it.
There are a lot of reasons, Phil, for doing it myself. The creative control, the fact that I know that this book will come out when I want it to come out. When you write for a publisher, a lot of people don't understand that you are literally writing for them. They control the title, they control the price, they control the cover, they control the timeline. So you have zero control. Certain publishers may not even be around in a year.
Sure.
Publishers die all the time. So for me, and I'm not that smart, so I think I have a very good idea for a book. I guarantee you, Phil, that with something like 11,000 nonfiction books coming out every year, business books, there's no way that this is the only one that
somebody else didn't have that.
For.
Yeah.
So because I feel very passionate about it, and I have this window and I have the knowledge, I was able to take steps into matters into my own hands. Again, if this were a book about the history of Las Vegas, 1920 to 1930, yeah, you know what, the book can come out in a year. It doesn't really matter. Sure. This is anything but a static topic, so I do want to make sure that it gets out as soon as possible. That way it's as relevant as possible.
Yeah. And just talk a little bit about Kickstarter, because I'm sure there's a lot of people watching this video that don't know what that site is. In fact, I wasn't that familiar with it. I had heard peripherally about it until I talked with you, and you were talking about how you had funded your last book this way. So can you talk a little bit about what that is and how it works and what's involved with that?
Yeah, Kickstarter allows creative types to fund their project. So you set up a project, if you like, include a video or pictures or blog posts or HTML or links, and then you let the world know. And you create levels. So for me, if you want to pledge $1 just for goodwill, thank you. I do appreciate every little bit. And I've set up levels up through $5 or $15 or $25 up to, I think, $3,000. I'll come to your organization with 100 copies, and I'll speak on a topic. So I have different levels, and people like yourself have been very generous in buying multiple copies, but you're trying to get the word out. And Kickstarter is basically a binary. You can't fund 50% of your project. So the art is finding the number that you think you'll hit.
Okay.
You can go over 100%. The best example is the Nano watch. The guy was trying to fund about $25,000 and actually came this close to $500,000. But getting back to
what is the Nano watch?
It's a Nano that you put on your wrist. It becomes a watch. The guy, Google it.
Wow.
It's,
okay. I gotta look that up. I'll put a link to that.
The Wall Street Journal picked up on it, and it nearly cracked $500,000. But the beauty, talking about platforms, Phil, is that Amazon actually makes 5%. You run it through their billing system.
Okay.
So if I want to raise $7,500, I kick 5% to Kickstarter and I kick 5% to Amazon.
Okay.
So, and I have to cover the costs of printing the book and sending it out. But more than funding, Phil, I'm trying to raise awareness. So a lot of people will contribute to the new Small or to this one, not because they heard of me or even if they agree with what I'm saying, but they believe in the ability for people to reach the masses without a proper gatekeeper. They don't want a record company or a movie studio or a publisher dictating. These companies, as you said before, are being disintermediated. They are, for the most part, middlemen. They stand between the author or the artist and the audience. Yeah. So here's a direct way to reach people, and people like you are saying, hey, Phil, where's my book? Most books come out and people are unaware of it.
Yeah.
So now there are going to be people going, hey, I didn't get my copy.
I may even just email you ideas for books that I want you to write in hopes that you may just take the ball and run with it. That you've got some other projects I know on the back burner that I'm really interested in too. So And I got to tell you, I love that. It's one of the things I've loved. I loved that when desktop publishing first came out, it took the power for an individual to be able to create any kind of printed material. And that's probably one of the first ones I can think of where I remember that shift happening, where the power shift that happens. And I love the revolutionary aspect of it and the power to the people aspect. And as a musician myself, I love the fact that I can use GarageBand and I can record. I can do live stuff on Ustream if I want to play live and set up a virtual tip jar and let people contribute that way.
Awesome.
And I can record my own songs and either distribute them for free or sell them online and not have anything to do with and these days with viral and social networking, I mean, you could be just as big, if not bigger, than if you had major backing from a label or a publisher or a movie house.
Yep.
Because it's unbelievable what can happen.
Did you hear about the Korean filmmaker who shot a proper film with an iPhone?
No, did he?
Yeah, now he had about 140,000 in funding for lighting.
Yeah.
But he literally, his recording device was an iPhone.
Wow. No.
So yeah, we are living in this revolutionary time.
Unbelievable.
And Seth Godin in Poke the Box writes about the tyranny of being chosen. So if I have a message for the listeners here, it's even if you can get a traditional deal from a movie studio or from a record company or from a publishing house, ask yourself if that's the right thing. Mm-hmm. Because yes, you're picked and you can tell people that XYZ is publishing your book or doing your movie. But, you know, if you really believe in what you're doing and you understand the technology, and you've seen the new Small, I mean, the age of the platform will look every bit as professional.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't know that whether you published that or Random House published it or, you know, any company published it.
I mean, there was a reason that Barnes & Noble decided to stock the new Small. They wouldn't have done that if it didn't appear to be professional.
Mm-hmm. And so, and the other thing is interesting, and I think that's probably made this book project, unless it goes beyond the new Small, but you've kind of got a team now, a virtual team, which is one of the things I love to talk about on the Anywhere office, of, you know, editors and book designers, graphic designers, marketing folks that you've worked with already. And so you know you work well. And so when you had this book idea, you knew, I'm sure probably more realistically, what the costs were involved to get a cover designed and to get it edited and proofread and typeset and all of that stuff. And you had some people that you knew, like, and trusted, which again is a concept I always talk about, which is huge, particularly when you're working across distance. But you're able to take the best of the best regardless to where they're located.
Yeah, it's really dangerous if you sign up with a publisher or if you sign a deal to do a movie, from what I'm told, or you want to write an album. I mean, you're in the music field. I know Rush for years faced pressure to commercialize its music. And you don't really want someone, in my opinion. Look, if an editor can make my book better, I've told my editor, make it better. Mm-hmm. Right? If something doesn't make sense, let's make it clear. But sometimes the powers that be don't want to risk offending. They don't want to put a book out there that's too far out of the mainstream. Sure. I don't think that my book is that far out of the mainstream, but my point is I want my message to get through. By the same token, I want it to be clear. I don't want there to be typographical errors. So you can actually have your cake and eat it too. People don't understand, again, with publishers in my case, that your editor has basically final cut. Mm-hmm. And what happens if they want to take your book in a totally different direction? So I don't, you know, my first two books, I had some challenges with publishers. For the last two, if I have a problem with my publisher, I can just scream in the mirror.
That's it. I always say that. My boss, man, he's a pain in the ass. He's always telling me what to do, and oh wait, that's me. So
right. Yeah, so for me, it's more honest, and I will be pleased with the final product. And whether it's successful or not, I know that I will have achieved it on my own terms. But you know, any sort of stigma with self-publishing is eroding. In fact, at the BEA conference in Manhattan this past year, I was reading articles about how actually traditional publishers are now looking for authors that did their own thing, because in a way they were kind of testing the market or the waters to see if the book was commercially viable. But yeah, if you spend the money and you hire professionals, just like with any other creative endeavor, I think you're going to get what you pay for.
Yeah, you got to surround yourself with good people, and that's part of it, is finding those people. But again, you know, the advantage is that those people don't have to be nearby. You're not limited to those people in your locale, because, you know, certainly from anyone that's read the new Small knows that you understand that the whole you can work from anywhere and collaborate across distance, and that's what, you know, some companies get and some don't, and being able to do that allows you to get the best team around you that you can, and and have people that you're comfortable with regardless of where they are, and keep creating great books like the ones that you've written, and hopefully this one too. So what we're going to do is include a link to where you can go and contribute to Phil's book, The Age of the Platform, and I encourage you to do so. Like I said, I'm behind it, knows a lot of people behind it, and if you like the ideas that he's talking about and you want to see this book come, and I'm interested also just to explore Kickstarter itself. It's the whole platform intrigues me, and like I said, you were kind of my gateway to Kickstarter, so I'm gonna have to, maybe I'll fund a big barbecue in my backyard or something.
I'm a gateway drug, so you're not gonna have money to put food on the table.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to. That's it. I'll be addicted. But yeah, so we're gonna include a link, and I encourage people to visit your websites, thenewsmall.com for information on that book, and philsimonsystems.com, where you're always writing, always have interesting blog posts and articles, and sharing your opinion, like you said, and you're not afraid to be opinionated, and that's what I love, and that's why we had some great discussions, and I love the articles and the videos that you share. So I encourage everyone to get behind Phil. We are going to have a little contest, and I'll put a little bit of information about that below the video, so that you can try to win a copy of The Age of the Platform. And I'm psyched. How long? What's the tea time till takeoff for Vegas there, my friend?
The 28th at 7:30 a.m. Eastern, so I'll be arriving bright and early, hopefully before it's 110 degrees. But yeah, I'm psyched. I think it's a good move for me, and for in terms of being able to chat with you, it'll still be easy because of Skype. That's right. Again, Phil, thank you so much for having me on. As always, good to talk.
It's a pleasure, Phil, and we'll be doing a lot more of this going forward. And I look forward to reading that book when it's published, man. All right, take it easy. Phil Montero, theanywhereoffice.com. And Phil Simon, philsimonsystems.com.